I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right.
Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to another episode of The Red Zone. I'm your host, Jason Galloway with the Wisconsin State Journal. If you missed our first episode of The Red Zone this week, you can go back and listen to that. We had Jesse Temple from The Athletic on to talk about the win over Iowa that Wisconsin had a couple weeks ago before the bye, kind of, where our expectations are for this team for the rest of the season. And I also talked to nose tackle Bryson Williams, who is a Lincoln native, and talked to him about how Nebraska didn't recruit him at all until Scott Frost took over, and why he thinks Scott Frost is eventually going to turn that program around. But for this one is our mailbag edition, and I already got your questions, so we'll go ahead and get into it here. The first one is from Mark Wolfgram at Mark W. Wolfgram. He asked, he said, "Thanks for keeping this up, JG. Do you think we'll see more blitzing? The pass rush has been non-existent so far. If young DBs are going to give up a few chunk plays regardless, I'd rather the D be aggressive rather than give the QB all day to find a receiver." Yeah, Mark, I think we could see a little bit more blitzing. In my film room story last week off the Iowa game, I did kind of mention that they didn't blitz very much against Iowa, and I think a lot of that was because, Iowa was not in a lot of third and long situations. They only had 2 third downs that were longer than 5 yards, and so there wasn't quite as many, obvious passing situations as you normally see for this defense, because Iowa was able to run the ball successfully. So I think all this kind of works together defensively. All their problems kind of are intertwined. The defensive line isn't on par from what we've seen in the last few years, and in turn teams are running the ball a little bit better on this team, and so you don't get in those third and long situations where you're where you can really go after the quarterback. And then also I think we talked about this on a little bit on the first episode of the Red Zone this week, but Wisconsin's been a little spoiled with some of the talented outside linebacker the last few years, and Andrew Van Ginkel coming back will certainly help the pass rush. I think he's their best pass rusher right now, and look, he hasn't played really at all in the last 2 games, so I think that can make a difference. But I do think Jim Leonhard might want to start getting a little bit more creative here, even if he doesn't send 6 guys after the quarterback very often. I think we've seen him do some things in the past where just some kind of deceptive things where you still bring 4 players, but the offensive line just doesn't know where those 4 players are coming from. Show blitz from a lot of different areas, and then just try to create some confusion up front. We saw that a little bit of that in the first couple games too, and I think maybe they might try to do that a little bit more too. It's kind of a difficult balance between making sure you do get that pressure and also leaving a young and inexperienced secondary vulnerable in one-on-one situations. So I think that's always a difficult balance to strike. And I think really in the past, Wisconsin has always, recently, Wisconsin has leaned toward, not blitzing a ton because in the years past, they've been able to get that pressure with 4 guys on a relatively regular basis. And this year, that's not really happening because of some of the new personnel and things like that. So there's a lot going on with the pass rush here, and I think you could see a little bit more blitzing, or at least a little bit more, pre-snap deceptiveness from Wisconsin in these upcoming games. All right, a couple questions from Ryder Cup Captain. First, he asks, who calls the plays during the game for the Badgers? Rudolph has the title of offensive coordinator. I've always heard that Paul Chryst calls the plays. Please confirm. Yeah, we've asked Paul Chryst and Joe Rudolph about that before, and I guess I haven't really gotten a straight answer on exactly how they divvy up the play calling. I mean, from what I understand, I think Chris probably calls most of the plays, but I do think Rudolph has a lot of input, and I'm sure that at some point, at certain points during the game, maybe he is calling plays as well. So it's definitely a group effort for the offensive game plan, and I do think Chryst is the primary play caller, but I also think that Rudolph has a lot of input in that as well. He also asks, please tell me we are going to beat Nebraska this weekend. I just spent $300 apiece for 2 Michigan tickets on the 50-yard line. I'm a little nervous about what seems to be a high-powered Nebraska offense. Yeah, I think they're going to beat Nebraska. I mentioned on the podcast with Jesse earlier this week that I don't think they really have much to be worried about. Nebraska does have some weapons offensively, and you do kind of that does worry you a little bit. They do have a lot of a couple receivers that are really talented, and this secondary is not only giving up some big plays lately, but they're banged up right now. Faion Hicks and Caesar Williams are both questionable coming into this game, and Hicks is expected to play. He's got a thumb injury, but Leonard said on Wednesday that he's expected to play, so that shouldn't be too big of an issue. Caesar Williams was just added as questionable on Thursday. We didn't know that was coming, and so that would be a big loss for them if they're without one of their top 3 corners. And Jim Leonard said on Wednesday that the way he views his cornerback room right now, maybe they have a lot of guys that can be really good for 30 or 40 snaps, but if you're playing a 60 or 70 snap game, maybe these guys aren't ready for that. And if you're down a man, or especially if you're down a man and one of the other guys is limited, then that really kind of hampers you as far as trying to not wanting to play these guys more snaps than they're ready for. So you have a little bit to worry about there. I think Nebraska will put up some points on the board, but I also think their defense is somewhat of a train wreck, and they've given up so many points this season. I think it was 56 to Michigan and 42 to Purdue the other day, or last week, I should say. And I just think Wisconsin should be able to go out there and take care of business at home against a team like this. I just don't think they should have all that much to worry about this week. But as what we've seen from this defense the last couple of weeks, maybe we should be a little bit worried. Okay, the next one is from Brooks Andrus at Babarakas. I probably said that wrong. He asked, how overrated is this offense? Well, I think that remains to be seen. We'll see how they respond after the bye week over these next couple games, but so far it's been a disappointment. And I guess at this point you probably can say that they are overrated, but that's probably not really necessarily their fault. I think we talked about this on the podcast a little bit too earlier in the week, but I think we kind of built up this offense in the offseason and got really excited about what they had coming back. And I think maybe you assume a little bit when all these guys are coming back, and you just assume they're going to take a huge step forward when it really is the same guys as last year. And they should take a step up, and they haven't done that yet. So we'll have to see if they do that in the next couple games, or at least by the end of the season. But Quintez Cephas not being here really hurts too. We talked about that a little bit with Jesse, and that he as deep as they appear at receiver, he was their best guy last year, and coming into this year, he was their best guy, and a guy that could always get open for you, and made a lot of big plays last season. So I think that has an effect. Zander Neuville not being not being healthy has had a big effect in their running game too. The consistency, he really hasn't. I think he only played 7 snaps over the last 2 games, and so he was basically out the last 2 games, and they've had a little bit of trouble getting that consistency in the running game. And if you guys haven't seen the news yet, he is out for the season now. Earlier this week in practice, Neuville suffered a season-ending injury to his left knee, and I think that's a huge blow to this offense. He was a key part to what they did in the running game, and him being out or very limited against Iowa a couple weeks ago was really a big reason why they brought out the jumbo package. And that's our next question, so I'll go ahead and say that one. But Ben Tannenbaum at MadDog74 asked, will the Badgers use the 7 lineman jumbo set at all versus Nebraska? And I think they're going to have to a little bit now with Neuville out. That I think that's a big reason why they went to that, is because Neuville only could play 5 snaps against Iowa, and they had to find Luke Benshaw, their number 2 blocking tight end, was also out since the opener as well. And so I think they were trying to find guys that could set the edge and give them a little extra boost in the run game. And Luckily for Wisconsin, Binshaw is expected to return this week. Paul Chryst said that on Thursday. He might be a little limited. We're not really sure about that, but I think getting him back at least softens the blow a little bit with this Neuville injury, and you can at least get another guy out there that you know can really block well at the tight end position, because I think Kyle Pennison and Jake Ferguson have been working on that part of their game, but that's still just not a strength for those guys. And I think if those are your two guys you're always putting out there to rely on when the Badgers want to run the ball, sometimes it just doesn't work out, and that's not good enough. And we saw that against BYU a couple of times. And with Neuville out, you really want to get Binshaw back this game to be able to give you something different than Ferguson and Pennison can give you. And I do think maybe they will go with the jumbo set. When I got this question from Ben on Wednesday, I was going to say they probably wouldn't use it as much, because I thought Neuville was going to be a lot healthier this week. He was no longer on the injury report, and I thought with him being back and playing more snaps that they wouldn't necessarily need to use that jumbo set nearly as much as they did against Iowa, if at all. But now with Neuville out, I think you may see that a little bit throughout the season as we go along here. And I don't think you'll see it as much as we did against Iowa with Binshaw back and the ability to put him in there. But I definitely think that could be something they use going forward. And maybe you'll see a situation where maybe not all 7 guys are out there, but you have one or the other between Jason Ehrman and Logan Bruss out there as sort of that extra blocking tight end. All right, Badger fan at Divot516 asks, he says, thanks for the great podcast. Why do you think the Badgers always seem to have slow starts each game? This has been ongoing for years. Is it that they and the opponents know we want to pound the ball, so it's always a game of attrition? Why would this change? So I think that's definitely part of it. I think when you look at this Wisconsin team, they want to go out there and establish their run game early on and set some of their play action up for later in the game. And really, we saw that over the first couple games that even though they did start slow those first couple games, they really wore those opponents down. You see that a lot in these Wisconsin games when you're running the ball over and over. And some of the offensive linemen have talked about it too, that they can feel opponents sometimes really start to wear down in the second half if you're constantly running the ball at them. And I think that's kind of what Wisconsin wants to do a lot of the time. And so sometimes that does, that is a little conducive to slow starts, I suppose. Now, I don't think, Wisconsin starts every game slow, but I do think that has been an issue in the past. And you're right. I think that style of play does sort of get you, if that running game isn't popping, decent gains from the very start, then you definitely may have a few 3 and outs to start the game, and it looks a little slow. So I think that's definitely could be the case. I think maybe Wisconsin has in the past thrown a little bit of early play action in, and maybe they do a little bit more of that going forward if they continue to start some games slow. And I think as an offense, you just want to be a little bit more consistent if you're Wisconsin. I think through these first 4 games, they've had some moments like the 88-yard game-winning touchdown drive against Iowa a couple weeks ago, but it's been a little few and far between. That they have they have some good moments, but then they go through long stretches where they don't do anything. And I think slow start or not, I think they want to get more consistent on offense going forward. And his Badger fans' other question is Paul Chryst coaching style one that will not have high-scoring wins because they don't run it up and want to run the clock as much as possible? And he says, therefore, to think this year would be the 3rd highest scoring in history is a fallacy. Well, I think that I think you're right about the fact that it is a little bit more difficult to have a really high scoring game when you're running the ball that much, because you're gonna have less plays and you're gonna have less possessions if the clock is running and you're running the ball a lot. But some of Wisconsin's best offenses they've ever had was with Paul Chryst as its offensive coordinator, and they were. So I don't know. The offense was a little bit different when Russell Wilson was the quarterback, obviously, but I don't think it's necessarily prevents them from blowing teams out or putting up a high point total. It's going to be a little bit a little bit less frequent when you are running the ball and you have less plays and time is running off the clock a little bit faster, but I don't think that's really an issue or anything like that for Wisconsin. All right, SMG at Sean Geary 4. He asks, who has been the most underrated player so far for the Badgers this season? I thought about this quite a bit, and I'm going to go with Olive Sangapolu. He's a guy that I think when you talk about this defensive line this year, I think we're always talking about the inexperience and the fact that they're not as good as last year. And at the defensive end position, that's absolutely correct. The defensive ends, they lost 3 really good senior defensive ends, and they have a lot of they have some redshirt freshmen who are still kind of developing, filling in to big roles in that spot. And Caden Lyle is a guy that just switched from offensive line a few months ago, is still kind of getting his feet wet and working his way in. And but I think when you look at Sangapolo, I think he's playing even better than he did last year. I think he's kind of taken a little bit of step up, and maybe that's not noticeable when teams are still running the ball pretty effectively on, or at least the last 2 opponents, BYU and Iowa, have run the ball pretty effectively on Wisconsin. But a lot of their issues against BYU were those jet sweeps and the counter action, and maybe some stuff that Sangapolo really couldn't do anything about. So I think he's being overlooked a little bit and underrated simply because the defensive line as a whole is just not as good as it has been the last few years, and that's kind of what we focus on when teams are running the ball against Wisconsin. But I do think Sangapolu has played really well this season, and I think he's having to deal with a little bit more attention as well, and I think he's doing his best to handle that. So that's the guy I would go with. I couldn't really think of another guy that I think would be more underrated than Sangapolu to this point. Okay, last one from Ryder Cup Captain at Cup Captain. What's the latest take on the changes made for the student section? Yeah, I mean, they're promoting the area red. I think I've talked about this a couple of times on the Mailbag podcast before, but they're promoting it a lot, and I think they're trying to bring some excitement to the student section. I don't know if all that much has changed. I guess they put the branding and the name on it. I did feel like the first game against Western Kentucky, I was actually pretty impressed with how many students were there when the game started, for considering the fact that they were playing Western Kentucky. Now it wasn't completely full or anything like that, and I'm sure being an 8 p.m. start had something to do with that. But I've seen other night games in the conference even have maybe some less fans than that Western Kentucky game had. But I think the next couple games weren't as good, and I think that BYU game was not good. It wasn't very full when it started, and in the second half, in the fourth quarter when the game was in doubt, there was a lot of people that had left, which really surprised me. So I don't know. I think there's still. Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the changes have necessarily fixed anything as far as the student section being full from the start of the game and things like that. But I guess maybe I don't know. I guess you kind of have to ask them. I guess I'd have to ask some students about if that's affected them at all, or if they think it's brought any more excitement to the game. I guess it's a good start to do something like that, to try to bring that excitement to the students a little bit more, but I don't know if it's really had a massive impact, at least yet, on attendance numbers and students getting there early and staying throughout the entirety of the game. All right, that's gonna do it for our Mailbag podcast. I appreciate all the questions from you guys. If you didn't get a question in time, we're going to be doing a live chat on Saturday night after the Nebraska game. It'll be pretty late, but follow me on Twitter at Jason_Galloway to get updated on when I'm going to start that, so you can ask me questions there. If you didn't hear our podcast from earlier in the week with Jesse Temple and Bryson Williams, you can go check that out. If you haven't subscribed to the Red Zone, you can do so on iTunes or Google Play, and we also have it on YouTube and madison.com as well if you'd rather check that out that way. So a lot of different ways to listen to the podcast as well, and keep visiting madison.com, of course, for all of your Badgers football coverage. Thanks for listening.